Virginia Hill wasn't just any mobster's moll. She was the fiery, fearless queen of the underworld, who outwitted the FBI, charmed the Mafia's most dangerous men, and left a trail of mystery in her wake. From her humble beginnings in Alabama to her rise as the mob's mistress, Virginia Hill was a woman of ambition, power, and deadly secrets who wrote the rules of organized crime. Born Oni Virginia Hill in Lipscomb, Alabama, on August 26, 1916, the future queen of the mobsters was one of 9 children fathered by an alcoholic father named Mac Hill. Her rough and chaotic life started at a young age, with Hill regularly being the target of her father's angry wrath. Mac would bury himself in the bottle and lash out at young Virginia, her siblings, and especially her mother. It was during one of these nightly tirades that a 7-year-old Virginia decided enough was enough. Grabbing a scalding hot iron skillet off the stove, she hurled sausage grease, still sizzling, at her father, stopping him instantly and leaving him severely injured. Less than a year later, her mother had decided enough was enough and moved with her children to a small cramped house in Marietta, Georgia. It wasn't the Hilton, but it was a safe haven from the increasingly unstable and abusive life with Mac. Hill and her siblings attended school at nearby Roberts Grammar School, where she completed only 8 years before dropping out. Hill was incredibly smart for her age, and her desire to strike out on her own was overwhelming. In November of 1951, Hill eloped with her 16-year-old beau, George Randell, and the 15-year-old set her sights on somehow, someway, making a name for herself, no matter the cost. 2 years later, in 1933, the couple moved to Chicago, well known for its gangsters and criminal activity. Deciding that her husband and marriage was holding her back, Hill left Randell and took up as a full-time sideshow shimmy girl and part-time prostitute to pay the bills. Working at Chicago's A Century of Progress exposition got her noticed, and from there she used her connections to gain a waitressing job at the popular San Carlo Italian Village. The local restaurant bar was an upscale hangout for the Capone gang, who were raking in loads of cash after boss Al Capone was sent to federal prison in 1931. It was here that Hill was introduced to Capone's bookmaker, Joseph Epstein, who was also an accountsman for Jake "Greasy Thumb" Guzik. Epstein was the catalyst that propelled Hill to become a mistress, cash carrier, money launderer, and spy for many of America's leading racketeers and the FBI's most wanted criminals. Epstein was immediately struck by how Hill handled herself, especially with the rough-and-tumble mob crew members. Her no-nonsense attitude and brash demeanor attracted her a slew of beaux. So when they met again at a party in June 1934, Epstein wasted no time in offering her a lucrative deal, one that would ultimately lead to her undoing. Hill would place wagers at a Chicago horse racetrack, betting anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 per race. Following Epstein's instructions on which horses were sure winners, she'd then claim the winnings, effectively laundering the mob's money and netting Hill 10% off every winning wager. Rigged boxing matches were another source of easy money for the mob, with Hill luring unsuspecting men into sucker bets. This income was pure profit for the bookies, and Hill's take-home would amount to tens of thousands of dollars. It was hard to deny her natural skill for these scams, and Epstein enjoyed raking in the bucks with no effort on his part. Now the jury's still out on the exact nature of Hill's relationship with Epstein. Rumors flew about his homosexuality, while others claimed the two were secret lovers. Regardless, the duo hatched a plan that would become a huge moneymaker for both. Hill, decked out in expensive furs and dripping in stolen jewels thanks to Epstein, would courier cash and merchandise for the mob. Appearing to be a shrewd Southern socialite, with an air of money, she was seen as less obvious than the typical male mobster, and at the time, less likely to be fully frisked. At only 20 years old, Hill was on top of the world. Her savvy, trustability, and wisecracking attitude at the outfit's hangout, the Plantation Club, gained her the distinction of top moll of the underworld, and the money flowed her way like champagne at a wedding. Another thing that flowed was the line of boyfriend benefactors under Hill's spell. One in particular being Major Riddle, a rich trucking and oil tycoon, Las Vegas casino mogul, and Chicago outfit associate, who was head over heels for Hill. Epstein took advantage of the fact by concocting a secret scheme to part Riddle from his money, by way of Hill's affection. Under the premise that he was Hill's only courtesan, Riddle showered her with gifts, jewelry, and most importantly money. Lots of it. Riddle also trusted Hill's business smarts and handed over tens of thousands of dollars for her to invest for him. Investments that were all but non-existent. Money that in turn would be split with Epstein. Rubbing elbows with famous mobsters of the time, such as Meyer Lansky, Joe Adonis, Frank Costello, Johnny Rosselli, Charles and Joe Fischetti, Tony Accardo, Frank Nitti, Israel Ice Pick Willie Alderman, Jack Dragner, and most famously, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Hill's membership in the Chicago outfit was legendary. No other mobster femme fatale could hold a candle to her. Men wanted her, and women secretly wanted to be her. Even the cops and judges knew she was a central clearinghouse that held court with the most powerful bosses in organized crime, and could stand independent among them. One contemporary commentator put it best, saying, "More than just another set of curves. She had a good memory, a considerable flair for hole-in-the-corner diplomacy to allay the suspicions of trigger-happy killers, and a dual personality, closed-lipped about essentials and able to chatter freely, and apparently foolishly, about inconsequentials. For all the money Hill raked in, she spent it just as fast. Often seen pulling wads of cash wrapped in rubber bands from her purse, Hill's wealth was completely untraceable. She paid for everything in cash, from her maid and secretary to her Chicago apartment and hotel suites in Hollywood and New York. She never had a checking account or put her money in any bank. Hill lived the life of a movie star, wearing expensive evening gowns designed by famous fashion designer Irene, only a few times before gifting them to friends. She hosted lavish parties, sparing no expense to impress and sending the message that she could stand toe-to-toe with the big boys. One evening in particular saw her dropping $50,000 in today's money for a full-stop shindig at the Mocambo nightclub, where she rented the entire club, bartenders, cooks, and staff for the night. Virginia Hill had certainly arrived. During this time, the Chicago outfit and the New York gang under Lucky Luciano came together to share investments in one another's vice rackets. Not one to miss an opportunity, Epstein sent Hill back east to use her charms on Joe Adonis. Epstein knew that the vain king of New York's vice schemes and Luciano family capo would be putty in her hands, and he wanted to be sure that Adonis was holding up his end of the deal with Chicago. Just as expected, Adonis folded and the two became lovers, with Hill sharing in the mutual attraction. Hill moved to New York, where Epstein mailed her thousands of dollars in cash to launder. This adding to the scams she helped Adonis pull and the money they collected from delivery rackets earned both substantial amounts of cash. Their financial partnership aside, the couple couldn't resist taking on other lovers, and one of Hill's attractions in particular would go on to be her most well-known. Blue-eyed, dapper-dressed Bugsy Siegel was certainly a looker, and Hill wasted no time at all letting him know she was interested. As one of Adonis's main earners, the married Siegel's reputation as a hot-headed thug who was prone to violence and a serial philanderer was well known. But this didn't stop Hill from hooking up with him, some say the same night she met him. This went over like a lead balloon with Adonis, who was equally both hurt and infuriated. And to hurt Hill where it mattered most, he took the news back to the Chicago outfit, who then cut Hill's allowance. Over the next decade, their stormy on-off-again relationship was one of two professional criminals whose money laundering, gambling, intimidation, fraud, and trafficking of Mexican narcotics wouldn't go unnoticed. Jumping ahead a bit, rumors swirled that after Siegel's divorce from his wife Esther in 1946, that he and Hill ran to Mexico to wed in secret, although this has never been proven. Siegel's connection with New York boss Charles Lucky Luciano resulted in the family gaining a foothold in gambling rackets on the West Coast. And Hill's association with the Chicago outfits Charles Frischetti and his Los Angeles boss Jack Dragna kept tabs on what Siegel was up to, something they never could have done without Hill's help. Dragna had a grudge against Siegel that went way back, and he didn't trust him at all. But Dragna knew he could take Hill at her word regarding anything, once remarking that she was the only woman he knew who could be trusted to keep her mouth shut. 1939 kicked off with Siegel and Hill taking a romantic refuge at the Los Angeles home of actor George Raft. Siegel and Raft were old friends, a fact that hurt Raft's acting career following Siegel's murder in 1947, as noted by gossip columnist Hedda Hopper a year later, who published that Raft was going stronger than ever today. He has made millions, but hasn't got 'em due to a fondness for gambling and a loyalty to helping old friends. As fast as the couple jumped into the sack, they jumped back out, and Hill fell into the arms of Miguelito Valdez, a Mexican nightclub singer and dancer from Cuba. But this romance cooled off quickly, and Hill soon found herself back in Chicago. Never one to be alone for long, she picked up and moved to Georgia a few months later, where she hooked up with a 19-year-old college football player, 4 years her junior. In a bid for domestic bliss, Hill accepted his marriage proposal, which came after only a few short months. Less than 6 months later, she would have the marriage annulled. 1940 would bring another marriage, her third, to former beau Miguelito Valdez. Valdez needed a way to return to the United States to resume his singing career, and Hill was happy to help out. Now things get a little blurry here, depending on who's telling the story, but we know that Hill and Valdez were photographed at the opening of the famous Hurricane nightclub in New York, dancing the rumba in front of news cameras. Whether it was Valdez who purchased the club or Hill, using money invested by the mob, we can't be sure. According to the nephew of Hill's lawyer David J. Wolper, his nephew's name was also David L. Wolper, to make the story even more confusing. Hill was also involved in a sexual relationship with notorious gangster Mickey Cohen, while she was married to Valdez. Things are going to get more confusing here, so stay with me. Shortly after the club's opening, Hill handed Valdez a stack of papers to sign, which he thought were booking contracts for upcoming acts. Instead, Hill had slipped in an uncontested divorce agreement signing off all rights to the nightclub. From there, Wolper claims that Hill became a client of his uncle, introduced by mutual friend, boyfriend, mobster Mickey Cohen. And as payment for services rendered, Hill gave Wolper the club in lieu of payment. Another version of the story is that Wolper was just a frontman for Hill, to launder money through the club for the mob. From here, Hill was now fluent in Spanish and trafficking heroin from Mexico to her Chicago patrons. Through affairs with the son of a Mexican finance minister and a connected politician, Hill was able to curry favors and obtain important information for the Chicago outfit. But this wasn't all that Hill was involved in. On top of the money she received from Epstein, merely for asking, Meyer Lansky was also a huge source of money coming in. Lansky took full advantage of Hill's sexual prowess and ability to extract secret information from her male targets. She would also serve as a moll, reporting the latest gossip and news back to Lansky, and pass verbal messages to and from other made men in the Luciano regime. In 1944, Hill found time to also kickstart a relationship with Carl Laemmle. The New York heir to his movie producer father's cash reportedly fell head over heels for the mob mistress, showering her with furs, jewels, and lots of other expensive gifts. But Hill kept him at arm's length, giving him just enough attention to keep the goods and cash flowing her way. Virginia Hill might not have been a raving beauty, but she made the most of what she had. As Epstein, who was unusually dedicated to her for decades, confided to Meyer Lansky, "Once that girl is under your skin, it's like cancer. It's incurable." The end of 1944 saw Hill and Bugsy Siegel taking up where they had left off, after Siegel was released from prison for the 1942 murder of mob associate Harry Greenberg, getting off on a technicality. However, he found himself in the slammer shortly afterward for felony bookmaking. A fight with Hill where he viciously assaulted her led to neighbors calling the police, and both charges were enough to earn Siegel a return stay at the LA County Jail. Siegel eventually beat the rap, but the stories in the paper kept his mob associates in Los Angeles at arm's length. Bugsy's reputation in the city was shot, and along with that, his patience. Wanting to leave it all behind, Siegel turned his sights on Las Vegas. Already having investments there in the Northern Club and the El Cortez Casino, Siegel was sure he could help turn the sleepy destination into a new utopia for travelers wanting something different and exciting. Hill was cool on the idea, not wanting to leave the lights and action in LA. Relaying Bugsy's plans back to Dragna, she was told to pacify Siegel by going with him to Vegas and reporting back on his activities. In 1945, Siegel caught wind that Hollywood nightclub owner and publisher Billy Wilkerson was building a resort in Las Vegas. However, due to Wilkerson's gambling addiction and penchant for starlets, he ran out of money during construction. Siegel knew Wilkerson's knack for developing winning investments. The popular Café Trocadero, once owned by actress and comedian Thelma Todd in 1934, and legendary Ciro's on Sunset Strip in 1940, had both been huge successes. This new project in Vegas would be the biggest, fanciest, and hottest resort to date, and Siegel was anxious to make it his. The Flamingo name, contrary to popular belief, didn't come about due to Bugsy's infatuation with Hill's long legs. Hill was actually built quite matronly, short and a tad plump. The real reason was found in Lucky Luciano's memoir, where he detailed how Siegel viewed the flamingos around Hialeah Park racetrack, where he owned interest, as good omens. Wilkerson had already given the Vegas project the name when Siegel entered the picture, and drawing on his feeling of flamingos being lucky, felt it was a sign of good things to come. Short on cash himself, Siegel persuaded his old friend Meyer Lansky, Chicago's Murray Humphrey, and the Frischetti brothers to lend him $1.5 million to finish the Flamingo. But due to Siegel's non-stop drinking and not paying attention to the construction, the money went fast, sometimes being billed 3 times for the same building materials. Siegel was oblivious. It also didn't help that Hill spared no expense when it came to the decorating, spending the cash like it was water flowing from a faucet. Siegel had also made several expensive changes to the construction of the Flamingo, and its opening had been delayed by a year, having gone back to his friend Lansky and the other bosses several more times. The cost was now over $6 million, and it still wasn't done. The mob was getting nervous, and rumors were starting to swirl regarding Siegel's ability to pay back the cash. Finally opening on December 26, 1946, the Flamingo's debut was abysmal to say the least. To make matters worse, a rare thunderstorm soaked the city, leaving water coming in from the leaky ceiling. Those people that did attend braved winds, rain, and muddy streets to find that no rooms were available due to ongoing construction, and there were only a few gambling tables open for customers. Even the performances of George Raft and a handful of others wasn't enough to draw people in. Siegel had hoped to attract the big spenders and Hollywood crowd, where making money hand over fist might have been possible. But the locals in the area weren't the diamonds and ball gown type, and due to the ongoing delays on opening, people had mostly lost interest. Hill and Siegel were increasingly at odds during this time. Drinking and fighting, in that order, in front of guests and staff on an everyday basis. One argument saw a drunk and enraged Hill punching a female patron in the face, leading to Siegel dragging her upstairs to their suite. "You've made me look like a bum," he yelled at her, leaving Hill sobbing on the floor. A short time later, Siegel found Hill unconscious after she swallowed a whole bottle of sleeping pills, and rushed her to the hospital to have her stomach pumped. After a loss of over $300,000 to lucky gambling guests in the first 2 weeks, Siegel made the decision to close the doors. Finishing the rooms and expanding the gambling hall, he then reopened the Flamingo in early 1947, but just like before, the resort continued to operate in the red. Bugsy knew his investors were unhappy about his failure to meet the conditions of their agreement, and the rumors that he skimmed $2 million of those dollars off the top to send with Hill to deposit in a Swiss bank account had reached their ears. On June 8, 1947, Siegel chartered a plane to fly Hill back to Los Angeles, along with $600,000 in cash that he owed to his buddy Fat Irish Green. Siegel then flew back to Beverly Hills, where Hill had hurriedly rented a lavish home from her friend and former Hollywood agent, Juan Romero. However, unbeknownst to Siegel, Hill had secretly booked another flight out of LA to Chicago, and then from there making her way to Paris, France. Many thought this was to distance herself from Siegel's impending murder, after being warned by the Chicago outfit to stay away. Bugsy Siegel was killed 12 days later as he sat on the living room sofa with his back against the window. He was shot numerous times with .30 caliber bullets, including 2 fatal head wounds, killing him instantly. His murder remains unsolved. After her return back to the States, Hill would attempt to take her life 3 more times. Living first in Miami in a house Siegel had bought for her, Hill spent time away in Mexico to try and clear her head from the whole Flamingo situation. After that, she moved to Reno, Nevada, before settling down in Spokane, Washington. In early 1950, Hill traveled to the popular ski resort town of Sun Valley, Idaho, and it didn't take long before she fell back into her old routine. She received stacks of $100 bills as cash deliveries from Epstein and others, and resumed living the high life, throwing parties every night. And never one to go without a male suitor, she took up with a handsome ski instructor named Hans Hauser. Hauser was a former world champion skier from Austria, who fell in love with Hill straight off. Fellow ski instructor and friend of Hauser, Otto Lang, warned him against hooking up with Hill. Sensing something shady, Lang had bore witness to ominous characters visiting Hill, who afterward left without even skiing. Lang told Hauser he didn't understand the infatuation, given Hill's far from pretty appearance, colorful language, and hard-edged demeanor. But Hauser would not be dissuaded, going on to elope with Hill the next morning after the lodge demanded that Hill leave. The couple settled briefly in Brighton, Massachusetts, where they had a son, Peter, born on November 20, 1950. The next year, Hill found herself in front of the newly formed Kefauver committee, having been subpoenaed to appear in New York to testify. Every national news agency was closely following the televised hearings of organized criminal activities, and they hoped Hill would be the star witness that would put away some of the biggest mobsters in the game. You can say a lot of negative things about Virginia Hill, but one thing she wasn't was a rat. Arriving at the Foley Courthouse on March 16, 1951, only a few months after giving birth to her son, Hill was dressed to kill. Her $5,000 mink cape, broad-brimmed hat and silk gloves stunned news reporters and onlookers as she made her way into the hearing. In typical Hill form, she drew gasps from the committee for her cheeky, evasive and sometimes vulgar answers, and denied any knowledge about or involvement in the goings-on of her mob acquaintances. Every question Hill was asked was answered in an evading manner, much to the chagrin of Senator Toby, among others. Her blunt manner shocked the news media who were airing the trial live on television. Housewives found themselves glued to the television daily to hear more of Hill's tawdry recollections. Senator Toby. But why would Joe Epstein give you all that money, Miss Hill? Virginia Hill. You really want to know? Senator Toby. Yes, I really want to know. Virginia Hill. Then I'll tell you why. Because I'm the best blank sucker in town. Senator Kefauver. Order. I demand order. Hill claimed that her wealth was obtained from her luck at horse betting, money that she trusted Epstein to hold for her in a safe deposit box beginning in 1935. When she needed money, she would simply ask him for some, not bothering to keep track of how much was in there, or when these deposits and withdrawals occurred. She also claimed that the fellas, as she referred to them, like former beau Bugsy Siegel, showered her with gifts and money. Bought me everything I wanted when I was with him, she said. He paid for everything. He gave me money and even bought me a house in Florida. Hill said she had no involvement with Siegel's business agreement with his backers on the Vegas casino, the Flamingo. She detailed that her relationship with Siegel suffered due to the stress he was under to make it a success, and she urged him to sell the casino because it was making him a nervous wreck. The committee, including Chief Counsel Rudolph Halley, also pressed Hill about her involvement in the heroin trade coming out of Mexico. The FBI had identified her in 1949 as being connected with Al Blumenthal, owner of the Los Angeles nightclub Ciro's, who provided the investment cash. She inadvertently admitted to also receiving $10,000 from Mexican sources, referring to them as her friends. Halley attacked Hill on the stand, not buying that she was naive to the dealings of her mob associates. Virginia Hill. But I never knew anything about their business, she said. They didn't tell me about their business. Why would they tell me? I didn't care anything about business in the first place. I don't even understand it. Chief Counsel Halley. The reason I ask you is that you seem to have a great deal of ability to handle financial affairs. Virginia Hill. Who? Me? She asked. Halley told her. It just seems impossible that you did not know who Siegel's associates were at the Flamingo. Hill claimed she spent very little time on the floor, preferring instead to stay upstairs in her room with friends. Virginia Hill. I didn't ever go out in the first place. I had hay fever. I was allergic to the cactus. Every time I went there, I was sick. So I had to take those Benadryls. And they would make me feel terrible anyhow. Ben's friends, I never even met them, or was around. Hill feigned outrage, barely containing her anger at being on the stand. Once she was excused by the committee, Hill pushed her way through the crowd gathered outside the courtroom, spewing obscenities at the press. One female reporter, Marjorie Farnsworth, attempted to stand in Hill's way, before being punched in the face by Hill for her effort. Trying to cover her face as she dunked into a waiting car, Hill yelled at the remaining reporters, I hope the atom bomb falls on every one of you. Although Hill had evaded charges, she wasn't off the hook with federal authorities for not paying taxes on the money she received from her mob associate friends from 1942 to 1947. Money that the IRS was determined to collect, and Hill had no intention of paying. Hill narrowly avoided arrest as she had a stopover at the Denver airport, screaming at the throngs of reporters, I'd shoot you all if I had a gun. In July of 1949, a lien of $161,000 was placed on her, leaving Hill to flee to her and Hauser's home in Switzerland. Hauser, along with the couple's son Peter, flew to Chile, where he worked as a ski instructor. Leaving most of her belongings behind, the IRS seized possession of Hill's home in Spokane and personal property inside. In August, an auction was held, and over 800 of Hill's possessions were sold, including 2 cars, 5 expensive furs worth $23,000, a ruby and diamond ring that were given to her in anticipation of her marriage to Siegel that never happened, and numerous china and crystal sets. Her home was sold to a man named Jack H. Vertrees, who paid only $31,000, only $237 more than the government's minimum bid. Hill, Hauser and their son moved from Austria to Klosters, Switzerland, still keeping a small apartment in Zurich. But Hill's criminal investigations and tax issues followed her. Having made over 65 border crossings in Europe between 1952 to 1956, the U.S. Treasury Department widely distributed a wanted poster throughout the country in an effort to locate her. They estimated that she had deposited as much as $5 million for the mob in Swiss bank accounts, and U.S. Interpol agents were right on her heels. In 1954, a grand jury in Los Angeles brought an indictment against Hill on 4 counts of tax evasion totaling $227,000. Hill, who now found herself severely strapped for cash, made several trips to Italy, traveling the country with her longtime companion Epstein. Epstein was also sending Hill money prior to her visits, even often delivering the cash to her in person. 1957 saw Hill spending time in Rome with old boyfriend Joe Adonis. By now Hill's mental state was collapsing, and her behavior became increasingly erratic. With the threat of jail time for her tax evasion case hovering over her head, Hill decided to face the music in the early 1960s. Contacting her lawyer in the States, along with FBI agent Clifford Rice, who had been her neighbor at her Spokane home, Hill agreed to return to the U.S. as long as her sentence was short, and her arrival was kept secret and out of the news. But the IRS added numerous conditions that Hill saw as impossible to meet, and they remained firm in their demands. She then tried using a secret diary she had kept that contained information regarding the mob to no avail. Hill then fired her attorney, feeling as though he had betrayed her. By 1965, Hill was on the verge of a complete mental breakdown, and wearily told friends that she was contemplating taking her own life. A threat that she delivered, trying 7 times unsuccessfully. Every time her husband rushed her to the hospital after finding her unconscious, having her stomach pumped due to an overdose of sedatives. Separating from Hauser in 1966, Hill moved to Salzburg, staying in a hotel with her then 15-year-old son. Desperate and out of money, Hill phoned Adonis and various other mob bosses, pleading for help. When that didn't work, she flipped the script and threatened to reveal her secret diary to the FBI unless they coughed up some cash. They didn't bite, and even her old pal Epstein wouldn't return her calls. On March 24, 1966, passers-by who were walking on a footpath beside a picturesque brook near Salzburg, Austria, reported to police they had discovered the body of a woman lying in the snow near a tree. An Austrian coroner concluded that 49-year-old Virginia Hill had taken a lethal dose of sedatives, removed her coat, and laid down on the bitter cold ground where she was found. A note inside the pocket of her coat spoke of just being tired of life. While Hill had attempted to take her life dating back to the 1940s, rumors swirled that Adonis had his men force-feed her drugs to murder her, after she tried to extort money from him, but it was never investigated. Hans Hauser died in Austria in 1974, after taking his own life. Their son Peter Hauser, who went on to become a decorated U.S. Army veteran in the Vietnam War, died tragically in a car accident in Toulouse, France in 1994. All 3 are buried together, along with other members of the Hauser family, in a cemetery in Salzburg, Austria. The smaller stone next to Hill's tombstone bears the name of Hill's son Peter. Many movies and documentaries of Hill's life and relationship with Bugsy Siegel have been made, including a 1974 made-for-TV movie in which she was portrayed by actress Diane Cannon. She was also played by actress Annette Bening in the 1991 film Bugsy, which detailed the stormy relationship between the couple. Thanks so much for tuning into today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe to catch every episode where we dive into the celebrity afterlife.